Just so you know, we are recording this class this evening. Let's go ahead and get started. First thing I want to talk about is this concept of sidebars and widgets, because this is something that you may have seen before, but not actually been aware of what you were looking at. Most WordPress themes include the ability to include a sidebar. A sidebar is just a section to either the left or the right of your main content, sometimes both, depending on how wide the page is, that includes content that is standardized across either all or most of your pages. Because this content is included on most or all of your pages, this real estate is at a premium. You really want to think hard about what is worthy to have that front and center, always visible presence on your blog or your website. Some great options for the type of content that I would recommend you include in your sidebar would be things like links to social media, if that's something that you do and you want to promote. A mailing list sign up, so that if somebody comes into your blog from any different number of entry points, that they see that mailing list sign up as an option right away. A list of your blog categories, again, because they might come into your blog from a much older post that they find indexed on Google, but want to see more content of a similar vein. Or in the case of Spirited Speech Masters, we actually have a link to the next upcoming event to encourage people to always sign up ahead of time to make the meetings go more smoothly. As I mentioned, this is something that's a feature of different themes. Your theme may allow you to have one sidebar. It may allow you to have two sidebars, or if you're lucky and your theme is really flexible, it will let you choose based on the page. So on the Spirited Speech Masters site and on the Dungeons and Toast site, we have some pages that are actually allowed to be full width, which means no sidebar is shown. And that's nice flexibility because sometimes you have content that really needs all that extra space. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and show what that looks like just to give you an idea. So Dungeons and Toast actually has a very sizable header because it is designed with the idea of presenting a lot of information to potential visitors right up front. But then you'll see that this sidebar has a bunch of very timely data, like our next meeting, the next time I have a speech scheduled. Pay no attention to the fact I don't have any speeches scheduled. The last speech I gave, and then links to members' blogs, because that's important data that we want to encourage other people to see. Now you'll notice that that takes up quite a bit of space. Look at how limited my blog post width is because I did choose to include that sidebar. Let's go ahead and look at another page. You'll notice that this one does not have a sidebar, and I made that choice deliberately because the Pathways browser in this instance needs all of that horizontal space because it has so many panes. If you drill into the effective coaching path, then you can drill into this evaluation and feedback path. And if I had also included a sidebar, I would have had maybe 1.5 inches of real estate to present this text. So if you choose a theme, look for one that gives you flexibility, or the flexibility that you specifically want. It's possible that your needs don't require you to have this toggle, but it's something that I do look for. So that is what a sidebar is. Let's go back to that presentation real quick and talk about widgets. So sidebar is the region of the page that's reserved for widgets. And widgets are just little bits of information. They're often represented in box form, but they don't have to be. You can actually have just a very large segment of HTML flowing down your sidebar if you wanted to, but oftentimes because of the nature of the content we put in a sidebar, they will be kind of boxed off so that it's obvious where one stops and one starts. That's why I've illustrated it in this way. Now let's talk about how to choose a theme, because that's something that I mentioned earlier. The things that I look for when choosing a theme is making sure that it's easy for me to customize. This might mean that I install 1, 2, 3 themes and then look at their customization options before I decide. If it's something that limits me to only being able to change a background color, as we saw 2 nights ago with a 2021 theme, that is definitely not the level of customization that I want out of a theme. I want it to be really easy for someone to change the fonts, the typography, the very specialized, maybe the sidebar has its own color, or the navigation has its own color scheme that you can change. So that level of customization is very desirable. Is the theme that I'm looking at mobile friendly? Most themes that are designed to be mobile friendly will say that right up front, because it's an incredibly desirable characteristic. Everybody wants their content to be able to be consumed on a small device. Another word for this that you might see is responsive. If it has a responsive layout, that means that it will try to take into consideration the size of the screen on which it's being viewed and then adjust the content accordingly. The third point that I'd like to make is something called the pretty photo effect. This trips a lot of people up. I know that it gets me sometimes. If you look at a theme and it just looks amazing, ask yourself, does it look amazing because they're using a gorgeous picture across the top? That's probably not going to end up on my theme. So what you really want to look for are the bones. Have you ever seen one of those shows where somebody goes into a house and they're house shopping and they're like, oh, this looks horrible, but the bones are good? That's what you're looking for. You want to look for regions, shapes, where you think you can put your own content, not where the person that's demoing the theme has put their content. Finally, things that you want to consider, and actually LaTanya made this point the other night, are navigation and of course your sidebar. Navigation is very important, and it's possible that even if the navigation appearance is understated or hard to see, that you can modify it so that it is very obvious. But it's easier, obviously, if you like what it comes with. So that is definitely another thing that I would suggest that you look at when you consider a theme. Now, I did some browsing the other night for themes. There's a particular theme that I really like to use that would not be a very good demonstration here because, well, I installed it right out of the box and it doesn't look very good. It requires a lot of customization to get it to a point where I would be happy with it. So I instead looked for something that would be great right out of the box. And I got lucky because I found something really nice that I want to share with you. And I'm going to share with you, not that I'm specifically recommending this theme, but the things that I like about it to give you a better idea of what you might also be looking for. Okay, so remember this, this lovely green site that we made the other night. We're going to go into our dashboard and I'm going to go down to Appearance, Themes. And just like with our plugins, I'm going to click this Add New button up at the top. So what this is doing on the homepage of the themes is just listing all the themes that I have available to read right now. These are themes that are installed on my site, but only one of them is active at the moment, and that's this one right here. So I am going to search for a theme that I found called Astra. Oh, that's actually searching what I have right now. Let me click Add New instead. So I clicked the Add New button, and Astra is actually the third one that is suggested. And these are organized by popularity, and I think you're going to see why this is so popular. So let's go ahead and install Astra. Just like with plugins, though, we don't just have to install it, we also have to activate it. So I'm going to click Activate. And let's go see what that looks like out of the box. Quite a bit different, right? It's much cleaner anyway, but pretty boring, right? Real nice and flat, clean. It looks like a lovely white canvas just waiting for some color. I found, though, that this has this really nice feature called templates. And I've never seen this in a theme before. A theme is a template, right? But this theme actually has its own what it calls templates. So if you go into the Astra options, which is a new menu item that Astra added for us, and then we go over here and we click this install importer plugin. So this is a plugin from the makers of this theme. Now, what it's asking me here is it's asking me, how do you build your pages? The default for WordPress is Gutenberg. All of these others are more specialized versions of WordPress that we're not using. So I'm going to go ahead and select Gutenberg. And now it's presenting me with all of these options. It says, would you like to use any one of these to get started? And let's imagine that I joined a new Toastmasters club and maybe they didn't have a website that they were proud of yet. I would look for something that would give me a nice starting point. And I actually found one I liked last night, and it's called Speaker. So they actually have 3 speech-related templates available. So I'm going to choose this public speaker one, which is about a make-believe person named Tim. If I click on this, it's going to show me a preview. These are all of the different pages that I can create for you. And I have the option to either only import their homepage, or I can choose to import all of them. Now, if I were starting from scratch, I would definitely import all of them, and then I would customize each one of those based on what they gave me, because they've already created really nice, interesting, varied layouts. And then all I would have to do is go in there and swap out their content for mine, and presumably it would look just as amazing. Since this is a fresh website, that's the option I'm going to choose. Now, if this were an established website, I would be less inclined to do that because I would worry that that might cause a problem with the existing content that I already had. But I'm going to go ahead and import the complete site. It's going to ask me a couple of questions. I'm going to say that I am a beginner and that I'm creating one for myself. They're probably getting tired of me downloading and installing their template because I've run through this a number of times in preparation tonight. You again. So right now what it's doing is it's copying all their content over into my site, copying their images over to my downloads directory, creating those new pages. That's why it's probably going to take a minute. There we go. Skip that. Hooray. I hope that this kind of gives you an idea of how easy it is to get started. Let's go ahead and look at this front page now. In fact, I'm going to leave this one open and open it in a fresh tab just so we can see both. So it went from this, which was their default out of the box, to this. And now we can meet Tim. Obviously, you wouldn't want to do this if your site were already live because people would be very confused about why your site was suddenly about Tim. But this would be a really nice option if you were just getting started. So what I would do in this case is I would look for images, a large, wide image that I could replace here. And then here, I would probably say something like, about Spirited Speechmasters. We were founded in this year, and this is our focus, and we are at MD Anderson, for example. But you can kind of get an idea of looking at the shape that they're suggesting, and then molding your content to fit there. Let's look at some of the other customization options, because a couple of nights ago, we looked at the 2021 theme, and I pointed out that I didn't think that the customization was very good. To give you a better idea of how good customization options can be, let's go ahead and look at what they offer. So I'm flipping back over to the dashboard. I'm going to go under this appearance group, and I'm going to go to customize. That's going to take me to the current options for my currently activated theme. Ordinarily, WordPress themes have these 5 tabs, site identity through additional CSS, but Astra adds all of these. And this is not uncommon to find that a really nice theme has a pro option, so that if you really like it, you can elect to spend maybe $30 to $60 to upgrade to the pro option and get more features. So that's something that you will see, but they're often going to provide you a lot of nice features because it's subsidized by that development work. Let's look at the global options here and the typography tab. This is something that's not available in all themes. What they're doing here is they're offering you combinations of fonts. So they're offering you, in this case, one serif font and one sans serif. And if you'll notice, when I clicked on that, it's actually going to update that preview on the right side of the screen. So it's really easy for me to see the changes that I'm making and how they're going to affect things. Now, these changes aren't happening live on my site, so I can feel free to muck about as much as I want. And then just like I were publishing a post or a page, I would click this publish button to make those changes live. If I am mucking about and I end up with a result I really don't like, I can just close this tab and it won't save it or anything. So that's a nice thing to be aware of. But look at all the typography options they give you. That's a lot. That's a lot even for me. Oh, let's go back. So that was just the font choices. Now let's look at their colors. I really like this feature. They let you actually define up to 3 different color palettes. So if I were making this a Toastmasters site and I wanted it to be brand compliant, I would go download the brand manual. I would look at those colors that they say are okay to use, and I would swap those colors in for these palette colors here. So I'm not going to make any changes right now. Let's go ahead and look at some more. Let's talk about plugins again. I know we talked a little bit about plugins last time, but I had some questions afterwards that made me realize that it was possible I hadn't covered this as well as I could have. Choosing plugins is really important because you can end up with something that you don't like, but you implement fully, and then down the road, you're stuck having to retrofit your site to replace it with something else that you do like. The way that I choose plugins, there are several different factors I'll look at. The first thing I'll check is the star rating. Now, if it's got 5 stars and 3 reviews, I won't even look at it. It has to have, just like on Amazon, if you go to Amazon and you look at a product, you don't only look at the stars, you look at the number of people who have purchased the product and reviewed it. That goes to the number of installations. Generally, anything over 1,000 is, depending on the type of plugin. I probably wouldn't look at 1,000 installations, say a calendar plugin, but 1,000 installations for a Toastmasters specific plugin, yes, that would probably be valid. How recently it was updated, because you want something that the author is keeping up with so that you know that it's not going to stop working because the author has lost interest in maintaining it. And then also checking that support forum to make sure that if there are questions, that the author is making an effort to respond to those questions. Another point is you should never be afraid to try a few different plugins in the same category. So if you find yourself with a specific need, feel free to install, 2, 3 different versions of a plugin that serves that particular need. speaking of needs, this is a list of common categories of plugins that I will tend to look for. And I'm tending for this to give you some thoughts about what do I need. You don't need to worry about taking a screenshot of this because I will be sending out the slide deck to everybody that's come to these 2 nights. The spam comment prevention comes by default installed in all of the WordPress sites. That is that Akismet comment, anti-spam comment plugin that we did not delete the other night when we cleared out the plugins that came installed by default. Luckily, Akismet is free for personal use. A links organizer, you can obviously create links as HTML if you want to, but a links organizer can be really nice if you want to reuse that content in multiple places. Contact forms. This is something that people don't realize they want until their site is a little more established. It is far preferable to have a contact form on your blog than it is to put your email address out there for anybody to scrape, save, spam you later. A contact form obfuscates your email address so that you don't have to worry about that. I've actually used a number of different contact forms. I recommend for newer users to use contact form 7 because it's really easy. But if you're looking for something that is really nice, not too difficult, I recommend Forminator. Media library organizer. We talked about how by default, WordPress puts all of your images, your documents, your videos into one bucket, which can make it really hard to maintain and keep track of. So a media library organizer is very helpful. The one that I am most recently using is the Real Media Library. Plugin organization. Plugins can be difficult to remember what they're for. If you install something today, you might not know what you installed it for 6 months from now. Something that allows you to add notes to your plugins can become really in handy, especially if more than one person maintains a website together. Email monitoring. This is something a lot of people don't think about until somebody says, oh no, I didn't get that email. And then you're left wondering, well, what happened to it? Because I think it's configured correctly. So having something that serves as an intermediary between your website generating the email and the email leaving to go to somebody is super helpful. The one that I use is Post SMTP. That way, if somebody tells me, I don't know if I got that or did you send that, I can go look in that bucket and say, oh yes, it was sent at this time. And then we can together try to track down why the person didn't receive it. Caching is really important. Caching can speed up your website a lot. I mentioned the other day that one of the first things that web hosts will tell you if you complain about your site being slow is that you have too many plugins. The second thing is you're not using any caching. Caching essentially doesn't refigure out things to hand to the user. So it will store a page rather than using PHP to generate it every single time. Caching is very important. I've used a number of different caching plugins. WP Supercache is the simplest. I've had the least problems. It's the easiest to implement. User and role management. This only comes into play if you are using a site where it matters if you're logged in. Now, this is obviously a factor for Toastmasters sites because you want to provide some content only to people who are members of your club. Maybe you only want to provide some content to people who used to be members of your club, but maybe not all of the content. So a user and role management plugin can be very helpful. I actually use members on both of my 2 Toastmasters Club sites. And finally, in order for us to replace the need for EasySpeak or FreeToastHost, we have to be able to replicate the meeting signups. There is only one of these plugins available. It's by David Carr. It's called RSVP Maker and RSVP Maker for Toastmasters. It's actually a pair of plugins. You have to install RSVP Maker first, and then RSVP Maker for Toastmasters, which extends the functionality. We're actually going to look at that at the end this evening. But first, let's go ahead and look at how to install a plugin. We're going to come back to shortcodes in just a little bit. To install a new plugin, I'm going to go to this plugins menu here. And I can either go to my list of installed plugins and then click the add new button from there, or I can just go directly to add new here. Another thing I'd like to point out is that when you install a plugin or a theme, sometimes the author of that plugin or theme will create these notifications up at the top of your admin panel. They don't show on your main website, thankfully. But oftentimes you can get rid of them by either Xing them out or clicking dismiss or interacting with it in some way. Just be aware that not everything you see up at the top of your screen when you're working with WordPress is from WordPress itself. It might be from one of your plugins. I'm going to go ahead and close this out. And we're going to search for members. And this is the one that I want. So I'm going to click Install Now. And I'm going to activate it. So you'll see it took me back to my plugin screen and it's lit up blue because it is activated. And I believe that it creates a new, let me see here, forms. Deactivate that. I don't intend to have that. Oh, here it is, members. So let's look at the members plugin and what it does for us. By default, WordPress has a number of roles. There's the administrator role. Administrators can do everything. It's always a good idea to have 2 administrators if you have a second person that you trust enough to be an administrator for a particular site. Then there is underneath the administrator, I believe, is the editor role. Editors can make changes to other people's content as well as their own content. Then there is the author role. They can only submit content, but they can publish their own content. They cannot edit anybody else's content. The contributor role is underneath the author. That means that they can submit content, but they can't publish it. And then the default role for new accounts is the subscriber role. The reason this matters is you need to know if you're going to have multiple people help you with your blog, you don't want to give them any more permissions than they necessarily need. You don't want to have to make everybody an administrator just because you want to have multiple people posting on one blog. Now, I installed this one in particular because it brings me to my next point. We're going to talk about something called shortcodes, and shortcodes are super cool. What they are little itty bitty bits of code, really simple. It can be as little as 1 word in square brackets, like this one here, this category list. And WordPress interprets that as, go look for the corresponding function that this is calling. Now, they can be simple 1 word with square brackets. They can be wrapping, which means they start and end with the same word, but the ending tag will use this backslash with content in the middle. Or they can be a simple word with 1 or more attributes or parameters. These two, the last 2 actually do the exact same thing. They're just written a little differently. Now, WordPress does have some short codes built in, but the ones that it comes with are not particularly useful. So I wanted to find something that would give us a better example of why you might want to use a shortcode. Many, many, many plugins will allow users to implement their shortcodes to control where the content that it generates will appear. So you might install a plugin that generates a list of links that you configured in your dashboard. And all you would need to know is the ID and the shortcode word. Maybe it would be links list ID equal to, and then it would handle everything else for you. And that way you could embed it in multiple places. Now with the members plugin that we installed, it has a really nice feature where it lets you create members only content. Maybe there's content that you don't want to share. Maybe you want to publish your Zoom information, but you don't want to publish it publicly. You only want it to be available to your members. So let's go ahead and see how that works. I'm going to create a new page. And we're going to call this Top Secret Meeting Credentials. And then we're going to say, here is how you can crash our meetings. I'm going to create a fake link there. It recognized that it was already a link. Okay. I think it did. Yeah, it did. Okay. And now if I were to publish this, that would be very bad because then everybody would be able to crash our Zoom meetings. So what we want to do is we want to use the shortcodes that are available to us because we installed that members plugin. And I have those pulled up over here. You can see here that you can actually lock it down by role. So if you only wanted this to be available to administrators for some reason, you could do that. You can comma separate those roles out. Or they actually have a really simple one called members logged in. And you'll see in this example, this is one of those wrapping shortcodes, members logged in, content in the middle, and then a closing shortcode with that backslash. So let's go ahead and replicate that on our side. We talked a little bit about blocks last time, and WordPress actually has a nice block specifically for shortcodes. Now you can put shortcodes in your text if you want to. So you could have a whole paragraph where there was only one sentence that you didn't want to share with everybody. But if you can build your content in such a way that you have a block for it, it's much easier for you to look at later. And you'll see what I mean in just a second. If I click this add block, I'm going to go ahead and search for shortcode. And you'll see that it has this square bracket with the closing slash to represent that it's a shortcode field. And I'm going to copy and paste in that members logged in shortcode. But remember, it's a wrapping shortcode, which means I need to close it as well. So I'm going to put in another shortcode right here with the backslash. And now if I come back to this page, I can immediately see, okay, so this is wrapped. That means that it's only available to members. And I'm going to show you that this works. We're going to look at this as a logged in user in this browser. Hopefully I will still see that. Yep, still see that. And then I'm going to look at it again in Firefox. So that was in Chrome. This can be very handy, by the way, if you're ever working with something that is role specific and you need to see what it's going to look like when you're not logged in. Just use a second browser because then you don't lose your dashboard credentials. I'm going to go to that page. Hopefully it's blank. There's no link because it's actually top secret. Now, something to know, if you ever see your content render like this. Let's imagine I thought I had a short code called Bob, and it's not a wrapping short code. Maybe it's just a regular short code that I thought I had that prints out a picture of Bob. And then I publish that. And it renders as Bob. That means I don't actually have a short code named Bob. So if you ever see those printing out, there's something wrong. You're maybe mistaken about the way the short code is formed or what it's called. It won't just disappear. It will render out with the square brackets. That means that you can use square brackets as long as you don't have a short code that matches. Any questions so far? Short codes are my favorite. Okay, let's look at RSVP Maker, which is another plugin that I mentioned. I know that a lot of us are members of maybe 1, 2, 3, in some cases 7, Patrick, Toastmasters clubs. And maybe not all of those Toastmasters clubs have websites, and you might get a hankering to set one up yourself. If Patrick did that, I would be surprised, but maybe. The only way to get meeting signups is to find something. Well, you could build something yourself, I guess, but David Carr has done all the heavy lifting for us. He's been generous enough to develop this piece of software called RSVP Maker, and RSVP Maker for Toastmasters, and it's what we use on both Dungeons and Toast and on Spirited Speech Masters. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how I would search for it and install it. And then I'm going to show you how it's implemented. The implementation is lengthy and complicated, so I'm just going to skip that whole process and show you the finished results. So I'm going to go to Plugins, Add New, and search for Toastmasters. And you can see that there are only so many things that come up under Toastmasters category, which is honestly a little surprising, but we're going to install RSVP Maker first, because that's the base code that RSVP Maker for Toastmasters relies upon. And then RSVP Maker for Toastmasters. Then it would activate RSVP Maker. And when I do so, it's actually going to navigate me away from the screen and back to my plugin screen. And then I would click Activate RSVP Maker for Toastmasters. And so now it's going to try to prompt me to go through a wizard to set up a bunch of stuff for my Toastmasters club, but that is really involved and lengthy. So we're just going to skip all of that part and go look at what it does for us once we have it configured. And I'm going to show you this in Spirited Speech Masters because that is the one with which I am most familiar. Not because they're my favorite. You're both my favorites. Just like my kids. I only have one kid. He's my favorite. All right, so you can see this is a Spirited Speech Masters website, and it has a lot more options along this left side because it has a lot more plugins than what we were just looking at. But if we look under the RSVP events, that's the base object that RSVP Maker creates. And we look at an event template. We're going to go into this, and we can see that there are a bunch of possible templates that we can use to start a new event or to create a new event, and then we can customize it for our own needs. But these are reusable. So at one point we had a backwards meeting for our 5-year celebration of existence. So we created a whole backwards themed template that we could use again and again, which, you know, of course we only used it the one time, but in 5 more years, we'll definitely do that again. We one time needed a business meeting. The one that it comes with by default, I believe, is called Toastmasters meeting, although when we installed this originally, it didn't come with it, so we created our own weekly meeting. Let's go ahead and look at what that looks like. Luckily, it's not too different than posts or pages because it actually uses that same blocks technology that we were looking at. It just happens to have a few special blocks that aren't ordinarily available on pages or posts. Okay. So you can see that this is blocks based, just like the other, but it has a special type of block here called Toastmasters role. Here's one of them. So Toastmasters role evaluator. If I click on this, you'll notice that this right pane changes. And if I click over here, it'll change again. And I can select the role, and you can see that he's built it with every possible Toastmasters role you could ever conceive of. So it's really flexible depending upon your club's needs. You can describe the role your own way. You don't have to rely on him to provide you a description, although I do believe that they all come with a description by default. So you can describe it however you would like to, or however it fits into your agenda. And you can actually set a time that's reserved for that particular role. So you can see here that the evaluator role is set to have 2 evaluators, which means it'll loop until it reaches 2. And there are 6 minutes total allowed for that role. You can actually create a custom role, which is what we're using on Dungeons and Toast for game night signups. We created a custom role for game player and for game master. So for game player, we set it to where you could have up to 6 players sign up with 1 backup, which is a nice feature. So you're not only locked into Toastmasters specific things. Is there anything in particular someone would like to see before we open it up for general questions? Okay, does anybody have any questions they would like to ask about WordPress or either of the 2 Toastmasters sites? Marcella, you're muted.
I put one in the chat.
Oh, you did? If you need a theme that needs heavy photo content. Okay, great question, actually. So what I would do if I already knew in my head, this is what I need this for, I would go onto Google and I would search 2021 best WordPress photo blog themes. And you will find some fantastic sites out there, like Smashing Magazine every year does these types of compilations. And you always want to include your most current year because it'll use the most cutting edge features. As somebody who likes cutting edge, I would definitely recommend that. But make sure that it's responsive. And Sally suggests that we should have our backwards meetings be annual. I could probably see that. Maybe for April 1st.
Another question I had is, if people are commenting and you're supposed to moderate the content, how do you do that, or where do you go? Or
great question. Just like with pages and posts, comments have their own section here too. So if we go over here to comments on the left and click on that, you should be getting an email every time someone comments. But in order to moderate them, oftentimes that email will have a link that says, click here to moderate this comment. If you have a Kismet or some other spam blocker enabled, it will try to recognize what it doesn't trust in terms of comments. So if somebody posts a comment that's just laden with URLs, it's going to throw that into the spam bucket until you say otherwise. So you can see we don't have a lot of comments on Spirited Speech Masters. It's really just me and Sally talking to each other. So by default, oh, look at that though, it did catch 14 spam comments. Let's go look at those.
so you moderate them through the dashboard. Okay, because
Yes.
Okay.
Moderate them through the dashboard, but you can easily get there from the email that's generated when you get a comment.
Well, that's what I thought, but that is not happening. So I have to figure out why.
You might try to install post SMTP, that email plugin, to
Mhm,
see if your site is actually attempting to email you,
mhm.
and if it is, where it's trying to send it. And then have Doug make a comment on another PC.
Okay.
Keep it PG, Doug. Any other questions that I can answer? I know this was a little bit shorter this time.
So Lonnie, being
Yes.
a developer myself, if you wanted to develop content in a development or test environment and then move that to a production environment, how would you accomplish that?
That's a great question. If it were just, are you talking about content like articles or content like trying out plugins first?
I'm thinking more along the lines of either new themes, new plugins. You're making a significant change to the look and feel of the site overall.
Many web hosts, including Bluehost, and I'll show you this because that's the one that I have, has a feature called clone or maybe stage, where it will automatically make a copy of your database and the entire contents of your site to get you started with a staging site. Now, once they do that, it's up to you to keep them synchronized, or to, I guess, wipe out your staging copy and make a new one. You could always do that. I say many because the site host that we use for the District 56 website does not have that feature. They do not let you easily clone your site, which stinks. Now, something to consider, if you use a bunch of plugins that you have to license, maybe you bought a $40 license for this and a $40 license for that, it's possible that the plugin maker will not allow you to use it on a staging site, a staging environment, without buying a second license. And that might mean that your staging and production environments don't stay identical. Now, some of them will. Some of them will actually tell you, as long as we recognize that your subdomain is one of these allowed subdomains, like staging dot whatever URL or dev dot whatever your URL, then they might let you do it. But I've had trouble with getting it to recognize that that was what I was doing. But let's go ahead and look at that Softaculous installer that we used yesterday, because I think that's where I saw it. So I went into the control panel. Again, you can tell I'm in the control panel because it starts with cPanel up here in the URL. Then I'm going to go down to here to the WordPress Manager. And I'm going to expand this site because this is the one that I'm curious about. And you can see that there are two different options here that would probably work. Clone this instance into a separate install or create a staging copy of live installation to test upgrades or changes. I'm not sure what the difference between those two are. Maybe one of them uses a different database and the other one points to the same database. I'm not actually
Clone, I'd guess clone is a dual production.
a dual.
So if you want
production.
to have a Borders and you want to have a Barnes and Noble, you would clone it and just change which company it was.
Oh, that makes sense. Okay, I could see that. Oh, and here are your backups. Oh, that's nice that those are there too. I should probably have already known that because I regularly back up my stuff. Any other questions that you have about WordPress?
So if you had a server running Apache and PHP, and it was maybe not something that you owned or paid for, but that you had access to, and it's inside of a network, would it be possible to install WordPress on that?
Yes, yes, it is. Now, it wouldn't be possible for other people to get to the sites that were installed on it unless you did some other stuff. There's
No, that's
other
what-
stuff, but yes.
So I'm thinking about, I have a site that for work really that does it talks about what we do.
Mhm.
And we're not on the official internal website, but it would be nice to do some fancy stuff with that. Is
That would be
possible?
really cool. Yes, I would think so. But you would need to reach out to for info. I will be honest, I have very little
Yeah.
understanding of the Apache environment. I only
Well,
know
we
enough
already
to
have,
be
that's already
dangerous.
set up. I mean, we have the website. It's an Apache web server, and I know there's PHP available
Oh,
on,
then yes.
sure, on that. So but it's internal. It's not something that you can get to externally.
Then
Yes,
yes, I think you could. Doug?
I've taken some classes where they walk you through the process of installing the LAMP stack and then installing WordPress locally. And
Okay.
I've looked at a few more recently, and some of the previous classes gave you like a starter pack where you could go to a hosted site. Some of them now just walk you through how to do it locally. So that is possible.
Okay.
And there are some fairly inexpensive classes like on Udemy that walk you through doing that.
So WordPress part 3 next Tuesday with Doug.
Well, actually, Doug, I'll just touch base with you and ask you about that later.
Okay. I mean, I've done that on some of my local machines. And if I can do it, it'll be easy for you.
Sure. Okay.
And Lonnie, I just sent you a link for the very first thing I found for installing WordPress on a LAMP stack. So, I mean, it's just you'd have to do everything manually.
Not a
Where-
problem.
It would be nice to have, as a developer, I'm used to working in .NET, which lets you easily step through your code line by line and investigate variables. And it's just really nice and easy. And on PHP, it is not like that. So I think it would be great to have a local environment, because a lot of times I'll tell somebody, go look at this thing while I'm changing it, and then I'll break it. And they're like, well, the site doesn't work. We're like, oh, sorry, just give me a minute to undo that.
I'm a Linux person, so that's not a challenge at all. I think we've already got that set up. We had several LAMP servers, but we've I think retired several of them.
Come on, Doug, I know you can come up with a pun for LAMP server. Did you turn the LAMP server off?
Left us in
That's
the
right.
dark.
I can't be enlightening at this point.
Yay, Doug.
You notice the look on Marcella's face. She's like, I am not making eye contact. All right, any other questions?
I have a just specific question. And
Sure.
so one of the things I love about my Blogger site is that I have my Twitter feed along the right-hand side.
Mhm.
Would that be something that you would do through core WordPress? Or is that something you would do with a plugin?
Yes, you would definitely do that with a plugin, unless you just wanted to build it yourself, because it does not come by default with WordPress.
Okay.
I don't think, unless they've added it in the last 5 years, which is possible. But a plugin would be better because it's going to tend to be more fully featured anyway. If there is something, it's probably really simple.
All right.
All right, well, if there are no other questions, you guys all know how to reach me. So feel free to send me an email, instant message, Skype. It was delightful to have you all. And I hope that I have inspired at least some of you to tackle a WordPress blog of your own, or just pitch in to help with one of the 2 existing ones that I've mentioned here this evening.
Thank you very much, Lonnie.
Thanks, Lonnie.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Lonnie. Great presentation.